baseball, Latinos in the major leagues. Before we get started, I actually want to mention just a couple things. A couple other events that are upcoming for Hispanic Heritage Month, starting tomorrow, September 30th. Tomorrow morning from 10 to noon at the Ames Public Library, there'll be Weekend Voyagers. So anybody that particularly has children who want to get a touch of Latino culture and whatnot, they'll be having a variety of activities at the Ames Public Library tomorrow between 10 and 12. And then also tomorrow night, here in the Memorial Union, starting at 8 to 9 will be a workshop on salsa and merengue dancing. And then starting at 9, there'll be a dance being sponsored here tonight by Hispanic Heritage Month and a variety of other groups. So that'll also be part of the Hispanic Heritage Month functions. And actually, before I introduce Professor Gilberto Garcia, I actually want to thank a couple organizations that helped bring in Professor Garcia to Iowa State, and that's, of course, the Lecture Series Committee that was helped fund his trip over here. Also, the History Department that also contributed to the funding. The Mayas organization here on campus, and also the Hispanic Heritage Month Committee who helped organize his trip here. Professor Garcia comes from us from Washington State, specifically from Eastern Washington University. However, he is originally from East Los Angeles, where he grew up and went to school there. He went to undergraduate school at Loyola Marymount University, did his PhD work at University of California, Riverside. And he's done extensive work in Chicano studies. He's been a social activist. He's involved in the Chicano movement in the 1970s. He's been involved in Chicano studies up in Washington for the last 12 years as a Chicano studies professor, and been very much involved with a variety of various political organizations, stressing and pushing for social, economic, and human rights, not just in Washington, but nationwide for Latinos and other people of color. And today, though, he kind of, a little bit in a way, changing his focus on his presentations, looking at the so-called quote-unquote American pastime, and that's baseball. And I think anybody that watches baseball in a contemporary period notices particularly a lot of the players' surnames are Spanish in surname. And so, of course, obviously the focus here tonight is going to be the history of Latinos in the major league. And he'll be focusing on an earlier period that we're actually aware of today, and that's the late 19th century, early 20th century Latinos in the major leagues. And I almost certain it's going to be very interesting information you'll hear tonight, probably stuff that we were very much unaware of. I myself was unaware of until I saw some of the work that Professor Garcia was doing. So let me introduce Professor Gilbert Garcia, and let's give him a good Iowa State welcome.
Well, thank you, Jerry. That's very nice. I know Jerry for quite a while. I met him at Eastern Washington University while he was doing his master's degree in history, and he also helped me out in the classes as my TA. And so we got to be, not only like I knew him as a student, but we became friends. We became colleagues. So now, we're colleagues. Because before, when he was doing the PhD at Washington State University, I would tell him, pretty soon we're going to call you Dr. Garcia, and then they're going to say, which one? And they always confused us at Eastern, like we all look the same, right? So like if you look at Jerry and look at me, do we look similar? But anyway, that's part of our life here. But I wanted to thank, the same people that just Jerry mentioned, because a lot of times, we overlook their work in the university. So I also want to thank the Lecture Series Committee, the History Department, Mayas, and the Hispanic Heritage Month Committee, because a lot of times, those people go unrecognized when activities like this are going on. And so I wanted to make sure that I want to thank them personally for inviting me and for supporting Jerry's invitation for me. Let me get started. I got interested in baseball, and I think as Jerry was saying, probably like several years ago, people would be expecting, somebody like me in Chicano studies to talk about, race exploitation, but here I'm talking about baseball, and wow, what's going on here? But I guess the times are changing in terms, the intellectual discourse and what's going on in the universities. But I really think it's an important topic as well. I got interested in this when my son, when he was growing up, my wife, used to buy him baseball cards. And I didn't pay attention because I was too busy doing my dissertation. I was doing my dissertation on the U.S.-Mexico border region. I was applying Marxist theories of the state in class, and I was really into this class analysis, and so I didn't have time to look at baseball cards, right? And then finally one time I says, "Hey Dad, look at this," and I said, "Oh yeah," and then I said, "Oh, this guy looks like a Mexican." So then I looked in the back, "Oh, from Mexico." And then another one, "Oh, Cuba." So then I said, "Wow, this is interesting," So then I started to, get interested, but I was too busy with my dissertation, so I couldn't really get into it. So I let it go, but we were collecting baseball cards eventually, right? And then I started really thinking, I wonder who was the first Latino in baseball cards. Like nobody had really done that. And I really got intrigued, by the inclusion of Latinos in baseball cards and their contribution in baseball. And so that's how I got into this. So I got out of the political sort of like studies, and I wanted to look at baseball and to see, how Latinos, have fared in baseball. And so right now, what I've been doing a lot of research on Latinos, but primarily the work like in the minor leagues, because it's an area that hasn't been covered. There's a lot of good books, on Latinos in the major leagues that you should read, but for the most part, they ignore like what happened to them when they were in the minor leagues. And I've gotten so interested in this that I'm beginning to look at Latinos like in Japan, in Korea, and so it's kind of getting me more involved in other parts of the history of baseball. And also, I hope I don't get some people mad because I leave out your heroes, so I'm sorry. But I had to be selective, and also I'm focusing more, on kind of like the early participation of Latinos in baseball. And specifically, I've been interested, like other, Chicano studies and Latino studies specialists, in trying to understand, the complexity of race and ethnic relations in the U.S. In other words, how have Latinos fared, for example, in different aspects of American society historically. So then, baseball, really, it's a great area to study that, to see, what has happened to Latinos in baseball, and then to use baseball as a way of analyzing and reflecting on American society and how it has treated ethnic and racial minorities in the United States. So that's really what I wanted to do, and I'm going to use some slides. Eventually, I'm going to get to them so you can, see them. I'll share some anecdotes that I uncovered, in newspapers, because I've gone through like microfilms that I'm getting blind, and, that looks at different areas in the United States for minor league, stories that nobody has written about. But so I'm going to share some of those anecdotes on the slides that I have here. I'm using primarily baseball cards. So like, this is one of them, but I'm going to be using baseball cards primarily of major leaguers, but also some minor leaguers that never made it, but who were included in baseball cards. So let me just give you some introductory notes that I wanted to share. One of the things that we all know is that baseball, was segregated. I mean, that's a fact of life. Baseball was segregated. Already, like in the beginnings, when baseball was established, it was primarily a whites only game. You had a game that basically excluded blacks, excluded anybody that looked dark or darker than the players, right, that were in that game. For example, already like in 1867, the National Association of Baseball Players voted not to admit any team for membership that may be composed of one or more colored persons. So like already in 1867, there was a rule written, that said, we're not going to admit any teams with colored people, right? That was their term. In 1871, when the first professional league was established, the National Association, and also by 1882, when the American Association was established, those were the two first major leagues in the United States. Even though they didn't have a written document, there was a gentleman's agreement, and basically was that no black players would be allowed to play in the leagues. And so consequently, for example, in 1876, the National League for Professional Baseball Player Clubs basically did not admit any black clubs. In other words, all black clubs into it. And even though there was no written policy, basically they would not allow black people to play in those leagues, right? So some of them were able to to enter. Like for example, some of you who are probably familiar with baseball know about some of the African Americans who were playing early on, like Fleetwood Walker, Bud Fowler, and some of those early baseball players who were major leaguers. But by the late 1800s, by like 1890s, there were no more black players anywhere in the major leagues, right? So like by that time it was completely white. Right? There was none of those exceptions that were in baseball. And so this is the reality that we had in baseball, and Latinos would come into this reality. So, for example, we already begin to see, the different treatment towards Latinos. From 1871 to 1942, there were at least 49 baseball players in the major leagues. So when you think about this, when the last black player that was involved in major league in the 1890s, that was it, right? And after that, no more. But Latinos were allowed to come in, right? So then this is what got my interest. And one of the things that I found out, in reading different books and looking at the history of some of the Latinos, is that Latinos, basically had to pass, two requirements. Number one, how white are you? If you could pass as white, in other words, if you were a lighter skinned Latino, you might be able to play. So you had to pass the color test, right? The second requirement that I've seen, and I mean, there's like a lot of examples of this. You had to also pass another test, which I call, nobody has called it. I don't think anybody has called it, but I see it in many books. Is what I call the folkloric esoteric image. In other words, the Latinos would be accepted, in baseball if they could be used, for example, by the media, newspapers, by the team, the owners, in promoting this image of stereotypical images like revolutionaries or grandees or bullfighters or some sort of a Caribbean player, who came from Cuba, dark, not dark looking, but at least kind of esoteric, and you could sell it, to the public, right? So you had to either pass the color test or be accepted by the exploitation of this image, right? And I see it in a lot of those players. And so then when you start looking at the entrance of the first Latino players, it doesn't mean they were not subject to discrimination, right? In fact, they were. I mean, a lot of the Latino players, early Latino players who were already growing up in Cuba, some of the best players were black. So some of the Latino players were subject to outright racial discrimination, and all you got to do is look at examples who went through that. We had people like Luis Padrón, who spent his years in the Negro Leagues from 1904 to 1926, or look at the work of people like Martin Dejivo, who was one of the most complete players, never made it to the major leagues because he was black. An example that I seen in some of the readings, for example, there was a guy by the name of Luis Anguilla Bustamante, who got a chance for a trial for the New York Highlanders. This is like 1900s, right? Well, he went to the tryouts. Well, the manager at that time was Clark Griffith. He heard a lot of great news about this guy. He's the best shortstop, man, fantastic player. So I gotta check it out, right? Well, as soon as the manager saw the guy, the comment, he says, too chocolate, too black, muy chocolate, So then, anyway, he says, let me see how you play, So the guy put on a Highlanders outfit, and started playing shortstop, and everybody was amazed, this guy was making all these moves, this guy's the greatest player, man. So then the guy, he was wearing a baseball cap. So then he says, hey, come here, man. He says, take off your cap. And you know what he was doing? He wanted to look at his hair, because he felt that if the hair was, where he could fix it and make it straight, maybe he could pass him as an Indian. And that when he took it off, he said, my God, you look even darker, man, put it back, So that was the end of Bustamante's experiment with the New York Highlanders, before Almeida and Marsans. Basically, it says, we don't want you because you're too black. And Bustamante never understood why, he was a good player. He says, how come I didn't make it? Well, basically, he was too black, to play in the major leagues. And but so then, why is it that we get other Latinos to be accepted? And here's one case. This is basically, you could say, kind of like a baseball card type of the first type that were made. It's of the Haymakers, Troy, the Troy Haymakers of 1871. This is the first. Remember, this is the first major league, the National League. And who do we have? Well, we have basically the first Latino player in the majors, by the name of Esteban Belán. But when you look at Esteban Belán, I've gone through a lot of newspapers. I haven't seen descriptions of whether he looked dark or not. James Cockcroft, in one of his books, he says the dark-skinned Belán, but I haven't seen any descriptions. But Belán was allowed to play with the Haymakers. But when you look at his background, you begin to get an idea who were the first ones that were admitted. Okay, first of all, Belán was a member of the Cuban elite. He was a member of a rich, Cuban family who were able to send him to Fordham University. He got educated in the U.S. In fact, he started, school from 1863 to 1868 at Fordham University. And I looked at the archives, and I haven't found his name in box scores. Some people said he was a catcher for the Rose Hills team. I haven't found his name. I have a feeling that he also was part of some of the teams that were called the Spanish Nine, when the Irish Nine would get together and play against the Spanish Nine. And I see that in the archives, but I haven't seen his name in box scores. But Velan was basically educated in the U.S., learned probably baseball in Fordham University, and then started playing with the Unions of Orisani in 1868. By 1870, he played, then with the Troy Haymakers. So 1871, 72, and then by I think 73, he was playing with the Mutuals of New York as a shortstop. But yet here we have a case, right, of a Latino that is allowed to play early on. And I'm pretty sure he fitted the requirement. He was white enough to play with the rest of the people. And also he was educated and a member of the elites. And so some of the examples of these early players fitted this kind of criteria. They had to be white enough, and probably they were members of these high elites in Latin America. Consequently, they were permitted to play around with other players. We have also other players that fit this description. Let me give another image here. Now, I don't know how many of you know of Luis Castro, but Luis Castro is like a footnote in every book on Latinos. But and also there's a lot of debate about whether he was from Colombia or not. I doubt it. So if you're from Venezuela, I may find out later on that he was actually from Venezuela. But Luis Castro, for example, is kind of like Evelan. He actually also was part of the elites, was sent to New York, and was going to school in Manhattan College. And he would go to school from 1891 to 1898 in Manhattan College. In his case, I've been able to find box scores with his name playing for the Jaspers team of Manhattan College. And even in the New York Times, where they already praised Luis Castro for being an excellent shortstop, and how this collegiate player was a surprise in the New York area. One of the things that would happen with him is that once he was done with college, he wanted to play with minor leagues, like in the Utica team. He would play in the Connecticut League. He would play in various teams before finally being invited to the Philadelphia A's. At that time, the manager was Connie Mack. And he actually would be a member of the championship team of Connie Mack. And I don't know if you can see it right here, but he's at the left, on the left side. Looks kind of an Indian-looking guy. I don't know if you can tell that right here. But he would be included in this, photo. What it was like a composite, sort of like a composite photograph that Sporting Life they would sell to people. So you could buy them like baseball cards. And then the individual images were also sold, to people. So you could send, for the photo of Luis Castro, a member of the Philadelphia A's. And through his, what's interesting about him, is that we can see the treatment of Castro. What's interesting, he was accepted pretty well, and he also followed some of the images that I talked about. Like when they were celebrating in the banquet, the championship, Castro is described as a very articulate guy who gets in front of the crowd, does a speech, right? He sings a song in Spanish to the people there, and then at the end he puts like a crown of flowers to one of the pitchers of the Philadelphia A's, and so it seems like he was quite accepted, in the team. Castro was very articulate. For example, I looked at all the newspapers, from the minor leagues all the way till I lost track of him. He would play, for example, after the Philadelphia A's with the Rochester team. Eventually, he would go to the Pacific Coast League, play with Portland. Eventually, he would move to the Kansas City. From there, he would go to the Southern League and play with Birmingham and some other teams. And then in the South Atlantic League, he would play in Augusta team. And eventually, he would manage and also play in the Augusta team. And also, I lose track of him in the Virginia League when he was a player and a manager for the Portsmouth team in Virginia. But what is interesting about him is that when I look at the newspapers, it seems like he never was made fun of his English, because that was one of the things that you would see with Latinos. They would eventually in the newspapers make fun of their language skills. But Castro was very articulate, and so in a lot of the newspaper reports, I see this. A very articulate Latino, obviously through his work at Manhattan College. But it doesn't mean he escaped, the kinds of comments that people were making in the newspapers. Let me just read you briefly, something they said in California when he first went into that area. Castro, was highly, had a high reputation. In fact, he was part of the Philadelphia A's champions, right? And so people looked out, at him. He also, was known as El Presidente de Venezuela. So you already begin to see those names appearing. They made allusions of him being related to Cipriano Castro, a president of Venezuela at that time. He never denied it. So this is why I really think he was Venezuela by birth, although he never really said, I'm not. Well, anyway, when he was in California, this is what they said about him. And this is what I mean by the folkloric, esoteric image. The Daily California wrote the following on Castro: his dark skin and walks like a Mexican. His eyes flash and his legs are big, showing great strength in his lower limbs. He resembles a toreador, and the bleacher boys call him bullfighter. So already they were saying, oh man, look at this guy, come and see this Latino who looks like a bullfighter, right? And so again, kind of making people look at these images and hopefully would come and see him play baseball. So a lot of these things going on in the promotion of a lot of these early Latino players, even though again, they are described being kind of like dark skin, right? Castro would be, so the second one, I would say he's like the second Latino to be part of the major leagues. And even though we don't know very much about him because he became a minor leaguer after the Philadelphia A's, he would be involved in baseball for many years. And here's with the championship team with Birmingham, where he also would be part of the photograph that was part of this baseball card that was sold to people. Again, included in a baseball card. Okay, when do you think it was the first black player to be included in a baseball card? I wonder if anybody knows. The first black African American to be included in a baseball card. Like what year? Give me a guess. Who's that? Yeah, well, probably no. Huh? No, Martin. See, a lot of those players, for example, they were too dark, right? And so they know. So I know one of the things that this happens a lot in baseball. One time, in the Pacific Coast League in 1916, there was a black player who was of Canadian. He was born in Canada, but he was part black, part Indian. So he's not an African American. He's like Canadian, African, I guess. I don't know, African. In other words, African descent, but born in Canada, but part Indian too. Well, he played I think one game or two, and in one of those games, the photographer for the CNET cards came by and took photos of all the players, and took a photo of this guy and put him in the CNET cards in 1916. Well, he only lasted one more game because he was fired by the league, by the manager of the team, and told him, we don't want you, you're black, and he was thrown out. So but he's credit as being the first black or African American to be in a baseball cards, 1916. But Latinos were already in baseball cards. Here's an example. Here's Juan Viola, born in Cuba, came to the U.S. 1904, played with the Jacksonville team in Florida in the South Atlantic League for many years. Well liked, I read all the newspapers. They liked the guy. He was one of the most popular players in the league. He would play also in the Southern League with other teams. Never made it to the majors, but he made it to a baseball card. Here's in one of those the T206 cards that came out a long time ago. We're talking about 1909, that era. Viola, again, broke, that color barrier and was even included in the baseball card early on, before 1916, right? Before this guy was included. But the Latino players that we are familiar with are those who would make it into the majors, like Almeida and Marsans. And these are really interesting stories. And one of the most well-known stories, about the two of them is that Almeida, had come to to try out for the New Britain team, and he brought in interpreter Marsans with him. And when the manager saw them play, he liked, the two of them. He liked the one that came to do the trial, but he also liked the guy that was translating, so that he hired both of them. So they would to play with the New Britain team. But you know what would happen is that early on, already like this is 1909, and they're playing in the minor leagues, and already the owners and some of the players began to complain that these guys were too dark, and so then the Connecticut League was thinking of basically excluding them from playing in the league, and eventually the owner of the team would have to publicly state in the sporting life and tell them these guys are not black, they're Castilian, they're like Spaniards, right? Therefore they should be allowed to play. And so already in 1909 this would happen. Well, their story would not end, because then they would go to Cincinnati. They would join the Cincinnati team. This is like they're in the July 4th game, right? Almeida Marsans making their debut. Eventually, the journalists began to write, and then they began to challenge, whether they were really white. So then, they once again the issue came up, and they told the managers, "We don't think these Cubans are white. We think they're black." So then, the owners wanted to find proof. So then they sent a letter to Cuba, supposedly, right? They sent us a letter to Cuba, please send us proof that they're white. So then, when the letter came out, they read it to the journalists. Hey, these are the purest bars of Castilian soap that ever came to the shores in the New World. It's proof that they're white. And then they were left alone, right? But both these two players were really good. Like Marsans, and my Almeida, proved to be like really good players. And when Almeida only lasted like 3 years. He played with Cincinnati in 1911, 1912, 1913. Then he was gone. Actually, the one that proved to be better was Armando Marsans, because Armando Marsans would stay in the major leagues and not only continue playing with Cincinnati and, for 3 years, but he would also be one of the first Latinos to challenge the teams, because he would leave Cincinnati and go to the San Luis in the Federal League, and it became a major controversy. Like you see, and he went to court, fought, and he says, "You know what? It's my inherent right to change teams if I want to." So he left. So that's this notion of the passive Latino, accepting things. He didn't give a damn. He said, "Hey, I'm leaving. I'm going to a better team." So he joined the San Luis Federals, and eventually he also played with the New York team in 1917, 1918. So another thing that I found out, I was reading Who's Who in Baseball, and apparently, the editors of this book argued that Marsans was part black, that his mother might have been black, even though his father was white. Whether it's true or not, but one of the things that is interesting about these two players, Armando Marsans and Rafael Almeida, is that they were part of the all the Cuban teams that would come and play in the Negro Leagues. So a lot of these teams came from Cuba had white players playing with black players in the Negro Leagues. So some of these were able to play in the Negro Leagues because they were part of the Cuban team, and then eventually they joined the major leagues and would I guess do a historical sort of breakthrough. When I hear look at the images. This is Marsans, who's supposed to be part black. Almeida. I kind of left at the images. I think when they were doing the baseball cards, they wanted to make they look white. But here's another one of Armando Marsans, in the black and white photo. Cracker Jack. I don't know. See, some of this stuff, when my son got me into baseball cards, I started to look for the Latinos, and here it is, one Latino, man, in the 1915 Cracker Jack baseball card. And yeah, he looks pretty white. And then, there were other players that came in, that also would experience similar, stories. Next to them, we would have people like Jacinto Calvo and Baldomero Acosta. Here's a Fatima, card of 1913, which included both Calvo at the lower row, if you see him here, and then Acosta, Baldomero Acosta on the right side at the bottom. They would be included in this team card, right? There's another one that I don't have, is the Cincinnati team card, which included Almeida and Marsans. So here you're having another instance of Latinos, being included into baseball cards, right? Where, they would be part of this pop culture, right? Calvo, was interesting too, Jacinto Calvo, because I've been doing research on the Northwest. Calvo would go to the Northwest region. In fact, he started playing with the Vancouver team in Canada, and then he would play later on with the Victoria team in Canada, and played around in Seattle in the Northwestern League. Eventually, he became very popular. The guy was very popular. But what is more interesting about his story, and I was telling Jerry about this, is that when I was doing my research on him and I followed him through the minor leagues, is that he actually would become very popular in the Texas League, because he only played in the major leagues for 2 years and only in a few games. Like he played for Washington Senators 1913 and 1920 with the Washington Senators, but it's basically in 33 games, right? Like they only used him as a pinch hitter, like they never really paid attention to the guy, but he was good. So he ended up playing mostly in the minor leagues. But what's interesting about him is that in his first trip to Canada, the newspapers report that the immigration officials would not let him in because he was too dark, or because of his dark skin. And eventually, we begin to find out more about him, and he was a very colorful player. Like he actually got a Ty Cobb bag from Ty Cobb, and he tried to imitate Ty Cobb in his running into second base, trying to break double plays with his spikes standing up. And but going back, to his kind of like personal story when he was in Texas, it kind of made me think about the treatment of Latinos. Here you have a Cubano who joins the Fort Worth Cats, right? 1920s, 1922. And then as I'm going through the newspapers, like as they are talking about Jacinto Calvo, the Cuban player, in the headlines of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, there's a photo, right? And it says, "Big meeting of the KKK." And I'm going, wow, the KKK, So like, in this community, there was a very strong, KKK organization, right? And then, when I start looking at the sports section, there's photos of teams called the KKK, right? But yet, Calvo was accepted. So again, he was a very light-skinned Cuban. They liked the guy, and he also was very colorful. In fact, what he did, in one of the with one of the local newspapers, again, the exploitation of the folkloric and esoteric image. Calvo, told the newspaper, that he wanted to get married via the radio. So then, they said, Jacinto Calvo, the Cuban, will get married via radio. So be on the lookout for, the marriage. So then, what they were going to do, connect, the stations in Fort Worth with the station in Cuba. And then one of his friends or relatives was going to be the groom and bride would be in Cuba, right? But he would be in Texas. So then he would say yes, and the person over there would be with the woman, right? And so then, they were supposed to do this wedding, via the radio, but it never worked because the radio station could not hear what was going on in Cuba. And they could not hear what the Cubans were saying. So it's, hey, the wedding is off, so no marriage, right? But actually, they already got married. So Calvo, did a lot of, this is the kind of, story that goes on with a lot of these Cubanos. They play with this, very weird, esoteric, sort of like background. And consequently, they were like well-liked and accepted. And remained, with the Texas League, for almost like 5 years until he finally like quit and went back to Cuba. He also was a member of the elites, like he was a member of the not National Guard, but the Coast Guard. And a lot of times they made references to how they wanted him to go back to Cuba because they needed him in the Coast Guard. And he said, "No, I like baseball better, so I'm going to stay here." And he would stay in Texas and play baseball, right? Baldomero Acosta, also would play, for many years. But a lot of these players, like I said before, played with, for example, Baldomero Acosta played with the Washington Senators from 1913 to 1918. So like a lot of them, would stay in the majors. A lot of them would go to the minor leagues, something that we haven't heard a whole lot in the United States. And here's Calvo, with one of the Pacific Coast League baseball cards when he was playing this time with LA, but he would be sold, to the Northwestern League when he went to Vancouver, and eventually, he would move on from there. Here's a photo of Manuel Cueto, another one of those early, Latino players. Manuel Cueto would come in and begin in the minor leagues. See, like we only know that he came in 1914 and started playing with the St. Louis Federal League, along with, with the other player that I just mentioned. But actually, he was in the Jacksonville team in 1911, actually. And but he was using a different name. He was using the name of Cuesta rather than Cueto. And the newspapers always mentioned that he was Cuban. And eventually I found out, there was actually Manuel Cueto, who was playing already in the Jacksonville team in 1911, 1912, 1913. And then eventually he would join, the St. Louis Federal. And in 1917, he would join the Cincinnati, national team, 1918, 1919. And was a very good player, but for some reason or other, he was never called back, to the majors. And eventually, what happened to him is that he moved around in a lot of the minor leagues, playing with different teams, Portsmouth, Virginia. He was a great player. He would move on then to the Pacific Coast League, and this is one of the baseball cards, Manuel Cueto, while he was playing for Seattle. Now in Seattle, they really made fun of the guy. I mean, they liked the guy, right? Remember? But they actually would make fun of his English. And let me read you a section of what they said of him that tells you a little about the treatment of many of these Latinos. Let me just find the citation here. And also the label they used especially in the Northwest, they were called the Cuban Wonders. That was used in the newspapers a lot. It was in reference to their great baseball skills and how these guys could compete with anybody. When Calvo went to Seattle, we were lucky that the Seattle Post intelligencer recorded an interview. Okay? And this is a part of the interview that was done there. This is the Seattle Post wrote, Castro is at home in the infield, and he can roam the gardens with the best of them. The Cuban has plenty of speed and is a good hitter, which is proven to be by the fact that he batted .298 with Cincinnati in 1918. Now, when he came to Seattle, right, they wanted to talk to the guy. So then the journalist did an interview, and this is what he said. This is, and I'm going to read it the way I guess he was talking to the journalist. He said, Cueto, he plays baseball because he loves the game. Ever since knee-high, Cueto plays American game. Come to this country and make good. Go to big leagues, hit well, feel fine for Cincinnati. Break my shoulders, go to minors. Play good again, came back. Then Moran, do me dirty trick. Take my World Series money away. Send me to Seattle, bad man. Moran, President Klepper, Seattle owner, not give me fair deal. I play independent ball, not cover off. Apple, Phil Line, Josh Landis put me back on eligible list. But I play baseball because I love game. If I don't get a cent for play, would play baseball for nothing because I like game better than eat. And Cueto likes his groceries. When I get on the field, forget everything but to win, win, win. And that was the interview of Cueto. But the journalist says, I think he means it. The guy really likes to play baseball. And but this was very similar to the treatment that other Latinos would get later. In other words, like where the journalists would interview them, and then they would type, the interviews and make him sound, with this heavy Spanish accent, right? And he would suffer, at the hands of the journalists, because of the language skills of Cueto. Eventually, we get into some of the most, well-known Latino players. For example, we have Mike Gonzalez. I'm sorry. Mike Gonzalez, would also come into the major leagues in 1912. He would play with Boston, and then Cincinnati, St. Louis, where he played like many years, and eventually with the New York national team. Catcher, really good. In fact, he was so good, that eventually towards the end of his career in the U.S., he would be like one of the first coaches in the major leagues, and even one of the first managers, because he would manage the St. Louis team for several, games. And so, his credit is being like the first coach and first manager in the major leagues. But when you read about Mike Gonzalez, the same thing would happen to him. They also would make fun of his English. They would poke fun. They would, embarrass him. But that was part of the treatment of Latinos. That those who did play, their culture would be under attack. Another example, the major great players of the early years, Adolfo Luque, pitcher, probably one of the best pitchers. In fact, Americans who knew Adolfo and baseball players and writers basically said, he was the greatest gift that the island has given to baseball because he was such a good pitcher. Adolfo Luque was very interesting, Not only, I mean, he was a good pitcher, excellent pitcher. He would be also like the first Latino to play in a World Series game. Let me show you some more slides here. This is Mike Gonzalez. If you notice, the cards, a lot of these were like strip cards. People would buy them like in strips. So a lot of the people who bought them, many times kids would cut them. And that's why they would look like that. So like you can't find them like in real mint condition because kids would cut them, and destroy them. And also they use the same photo. Do you notice like it's the same position? The only thing they did is like either change the color, like put red in the background, or make a reverse negative, right? So like you have in the right and him with the left. And they did a lot of this with Gonzalez and Adolfo Luque in baseball cards. Just another example, like the same position, different baseball cards, but it's still the same image. And here's some of the later baseball cards of Mike Gonzalez. Mike Gonzalez, a coach with St. Louis Cardinals. Again. He's Adolfo Luque, the pitcher that I was talking about. He's a 1933 goodie. Does he look dark? Look at his blue eyes almost. What is it? And so we really never know whether they were that white. But Adolfo Luque would be, become part of the folklore of baseball. And I have a little story that I found in a book. This is just to show you like how people remember some of these players. Adolfo Luque was facing this rookie player, a young rookie player, and so Luque was pitching, and this guy was he didn't know actually Luque. So then Smith felt like I'm really good, I can bet against anybody, and so then when he was batting, and then he saw Luque and heard him talk. Well, he approached the mound. He says, "Why are you speaking?" And then Luque goes, "Spanish." Oh, and then he says, then eventually, he asked more questions, where are you from? He says, I'm from Cuba. Luque was getting a little bit mad because then he says, you from what? And also he made fun of the name. He says, what's your name? Adolfo Luque. Adolfo K? Kind of like making fun of Adolfo Luque. Luque, was known as like somebody who gets upset, right? So like he was getting mad. And this guy was getting pissed at this white guy, who was making fun of him. So then finally, the guy says, the umpire says, hey, you're delaying the game. Come on, let's go. So then the guy goes back to the batter box. So then as he's walking away, Luque shouts, now I'm going to show you where Cuba is, man. So the guy goes to the batting box, and then Luque starts pitching, throws a pitch, that goes to the inside. The guy didn't even see it, right? And then the guy's getting ready for the second one, throws another one. He goes to the outside. The guy didn't see the pitch, right? So he says, oh, I'm going to get ready. Fastball, right? He's waiting. So then, Luque gets ready, pitches, curve, standing. Where's the ball? So then, the guy, he says, wow, who's this guy? So then the catcher, wanted to make him feel better. He says, don't feel bad, este hombre, this man, just won, 27 games last year. And like he had won like a lot of games before. So he's done it to a lot of people. So the guy went like, oh, I guess I'm not ready for major league players, But Luque was like that, There's another story, that's even funnier, that actually occurred in Cuba, where this guy, I guess he was the manager this time, the Cuban team. And so Luque got upset with the guy because he didn't think he was playing the way he should, right? So the player, got upset, got mad. He went back to the dugout and got his things and started to pack, his clothes. I'm not going to play with Luque. I don't like this guy, Luque already knew something was going on, so he went back. And according to the story, he pulled out a gun and started shooting at the guy. Pow, And the guy was going, shit, what's going on? And so then, the other players came by, what's going on? So Luque was shooting at this player, right? And the player was shooting in his pants, and he was going like, oh, I'm going to get shot, So then, the radio announcers, in the game were saying, something was going on because they could hear the shots. So then they called it El Portazo de Luque. They said, oh, what you heard was a door being slammed, right? The slamming of a door. But actually, Luque was shooting at this guy. So then, this black player who was part of the Negro Leagues, Rodolfo Alvarez, actually went and saved the guy, took him out, said, hey, Luque, watch him, you're going to kill him, you know. The guy was real angry, so he left. And so later on, whenever they meet, hey, you saved my life, man. I could have gotten killed by Luque. So Luque, you know, had this kind of, personality that a lot of people, thought, that was kind of like the Latino sort of like character, that they were like explosive and they could get angry. But Luque was a good player. I mean, if you look at his records, I mean, he was like one of the best pitchers. I mean, he won a lot of games. He should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't know why he's not in the Hall of Fame. And then also, look at this. This is about part of the Conlon collection. Adolfo Luque in the Reds versus the White Sox in Game 3 of 1919. Remember that Black Sox scandal? He would be part of that series. He was one of the pitchers. And so he would also become one of the first Latinos to be in a World Series game. The first Latino to ever participate in one. And he would be part of others. Here's Adolfo Luque, New York. Here's like one of those cards, kind of remembering when he was in the Reds. Another photo, of baseball card of the era. And there's some other minor ones that we never found out, like Ramon Herrera, who also came from Cuba, but spent most of his time in the minor leagues, like in the Western League, playing for Pueblo, playing for those teams in the Western League. But who also played only a few games, but managed to get into a game in a baseball card. But then they moved to another group, except a lot of you don't know about this. When I was doing my research, I also wanted to know who was the first Mexican in the major leagues. Like we already knew about the Cubanos. So in the late 20s, 30s, there were like several candidates, and I would find out eventually that there were several Mexicans playing in the minor leagues who might make it to the majors. And one of them actually was from San Antonio. His name was Leonardo Alanis, but actually a lot of people thought that he was Indian first, and they called him Leo Nacho. And he played in the San Antonio team for many years, but later on we found out he was Mexican.